Do you want to call the meeting to order?
It's called meeting to order.
Okay, great. I will call roll call. Councilmember Kesarwani.
Here.
Councilmember O'Keefe. Here. Councilmember Blackaby.
Here.
We have a quorum. Can I get a motion to elect a council member as chairperson?
Yeah, I'd like to motion to nominate Councilmember Blackaby. Second.
All right.
I will roll call. Councilmember Kesarwani.
Yes.
Councilmember O'Keefe.
Yes.
Councilmember Blackaby.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Blackaby is chair of the Public Safety Policy.
Thank you. I know on the agenda, we often have public comment on non-agenda matters, not on this agenda. Is that
That's correct. It's a special meeting, so
Great.
public comment is limited to items on the agenda only.
great? Great. We'll move to item 1, which is the minutes of the November 18th, 2024 meeting. I know none of us were there, but they looked good to me. Any comment on the minutes?
I'll just say I normally abstain from minutes when I wasn't there, but that's not gonna work this time, so I'm not aware of any discrepancy. If anyone makes us aware, I'd be here, otherwise I'm going to vote yes.
Second. Or
Oh, yeah, sorry. Motion to-
Second.
Without objection, was considered approved. Okay, great. Okay, moving into committee action items. With your indulgence, I'd ask maybe we reorder the action items and start with item 3. That's okay on the, since I know we have a good group there for that. So I'd suggest we move on to, for now, start with item 3. Is there an objection to doing that? Since I know that we've got a presentation here for that. So we'll start with the texting offenses presentation. My understanding is the Police Accountability Board has a short presentation. And so up to 10 minutes for that presentation. So we'll start with the presentation from the board. Definitely want to hear then as well from the police department. We'll probably have some questions. We'll take public comment and go from there. So let's go ahead and start with item 3 and the presentation from the PAB.
I feel a little odd not being able to face the council members and the public, so if it's okay,
Sure.
I'm gonna stand over here. Good morning, my name is Kitty Calavita, and I'm the chair of the PAB subcommittee on the Downtown Task Force and Bike Unit texting offenses. Also on that subcommittee was the former chair, Chip Moore, and with us today is also Director Aguilar. And remotely, we have our current PAB chair, Cayetano, and our vice chair, Wilson, and they'll be presenting the Fair and Impartial Policing report. So let me get started. I have a few, and I'm going to read a little bit, try not to read too much, but I really want to keep it to 10 minutes or under, and I have a few very brief slides as well. So can we have the next slide, please? Jose is directing from upstairs or across the street. You no doubt remember the egregious text messages that were sent in 2019 and 2020. I'm not going to read them out, but here's a small sampling of those text messages. What they reveal is some racist sentiment, disdain for the unhoused, and a push to meet informal arrest quotas. Next slide. Mayor Arreguín, then mayor, said at the time, what's clear from a plain reading of these text messages is that it demonstrates the need for reforms. A law firm, you'll remember probably a law firm was hired to do an external investigation, and that report was not made public except to say that the text messages were authenticated by forensics. The PAB was not allowed to do a misconduct investigation or to recommend discipline, but that we, according to the city attorney, we were limited to doing a policy and practices review. So that's what we did. Even so, we spent a lot of time trying to ask really important information in order for us to fulfill our charter mandated oversight duties. Our report indicated key areas where the BPD fell short. Next Next slide. Not only did officers exchange these text messages, but I think we skipped a slide. Jose, we should have a slide on the equal numbers of Black people and white people being arrested. There we are. So equal numbers of Black people and white people were arrested during this period, and the racial disparity grew over time. Next slide. There were also expectations to meet implicit arrest quotas. And you can see here that the arrests peaked precisely in the month that those pressures were being exerted by the sergeant. Next slide. These officers routinely used personal cell phones to discuss work-related matters, and overtime was essentially unlimited. Finally, and strikingly, the interviewed officers in the audio tapes that we were allowed to listen to rejected any reading of the text messages as racist or disdainful or as pushing quotas. Instead, they dismissed these messages that were so appalled the community as jokes. The PAB is eager to work with the department on policy reforms within the BPD. We're pleased that the chief has written that she's eager to collaborate with the PAB on implementing or tweaking and implementing some of these reforms. And these reforms that we're recommending include preliminarily, next slide, establishing a freestanding policy to ban arrest quotas. Most people believe that arrest quota prohibitions are written into the penal code of the state of California, but that's not correct. They're only found in the vehicle code and only apply to vehicle stops. And so the PAB recommends that the department, for now, adopt a freestanding policy prohibiting all arrest quotas, whether formal or informal. A sample of that policy is attached in Appendix 3, just a recommended example. Second, another recommendation is to ensure that stay-away orders are enforced fairly. Stay-away orders were an important element of the arrests that were done by the Downtown Task Force, but the department lacks any specific policy regarding stay-away orders, even though they're one focus of those downtown arrests. And in fact, the interviewed officers that we listened to were unclear about whether they had discretion or whether they didn't have discretion in implementing stay-away orders. In addition, we recommend modifications to several existing policies, and I don't have time to go through each one of these policies, but they are in our packet. So these policies, there are 5 specific ones. And they are, well, I think next slide, please. Oh, no, there it is. I'm sorry, go back, please, Jose. Revised policies on fair and impartial policing, standards of conduct, employee speech, and social networking, the use of personal devices, and overtime requests. And each one of those is in your packet with redlined recommended changes. So just to give you one example on standards of conduct, the PAB is pleased that the chief has adopted what's called the Active Bystander for Law Enforcement, or ABLE program. That program will train officers to intervene when they witness others engaging in misconduct. And we're fully in support of that and very happy that she's going through that. In addition to that, the reforms we recommend to the standards of conduct policy would include making it clear that the policy includes any behavior or expression that brings disrepute to the department, whether an officer is on or off duty. Next slide, please. At least as important as these policy reforms, the PAB recommends that City Council take action on several fronts. And I won't go into too much detail here because they're all in your packet. But the first is that council adopt a resolution ensuring meaningful and robust accountability whether officers are on or off duty. Several of the text messages make it clear that this is really imperative. This is not to imply that anything about the officers in this particular case, nor any of the cases that have come to light, we're in fact not privy to internal disciplinary matters. But meaningful accountability is critical for many reasons. A recent study published in the science journal, Human Nature Behavior, found that when officers are not held accountable for misconduct, it results in the propagation of misconduct in those around them. The study showed that even when shuffling an officer to a different unit, their peers are more likely to engage in misconduct themselves. We're asking council to pass a resolution emphasizing the importance of robust accountability, not only for the purpose of community trust, but also to prevent such contagion and associated morale problems. Next slide. Second, we recommend that the city council pass an ordinance or otherwise affirm the PAB's ability to access documents and records in furtherance of our charter mandated oversight duties. The policy reforms we recommend are a first step in ensuring that the kind of conduct revealed in these messages does not recur. But policy reforms are only a first step, and that's what's critical in this particular recommendation, because no policy is effective if it is not fully implemented. Real law, real policy, and this is my field of study, is sociology of law and law in action. And the point is that real law and real policy takes place on the ground where it is literally enacted every day through practice. So the charter amendment has established that PAB requires that we oversee not only policy, but practice. That's inscribed in the charter. Our policy and practices review of the texting incidents and the challenges we confronted to gain crucial information reveals how critical this is. Keep in mind that this conduct went undisclosed for more than 2 years before being revealed by an individual who was no longer part of the force, who understood how egregious they were. And he recognized that these were egregious offenses. The department noted in its response to this recommendation that we are currently in negotiations with the union over regulations that control the process for confidential personnel complaints filed by members of the public. But that's not what we're talking about here. That's not the issue here. What the PAB is asking council to do is to authorize access to records that are critical to our duty to oversee policy and practice as mandated by the charter. It's not about personnel complaints. Restoring trust and helping prevent misconduct through robust oversight is not only the morally right thing to do, it's the fiscally responsible thing. According to the city attorney's office, over the last decade, the city has responded to almost 500 legal claims related to Berkeley Police Department activities, costing the city more than $2 billion. So this is a fiscal measure as well as one that upholds Berkeley's values. In concluding, I want to emphasize that these text messages shook the Berkeley community and its leaders alike. No doubt, they were also demoralizing to the many members of the force who find such sentiments repugnant. Our report is forward-looking, though, and aims to provide an environment in which transparency, accountability, and justice can flourish. It will only happen if all hands are on deck. We look forward to working with the council, the community, and the department in this endeavor. So what we're asking today is 2 things. One, that you forward to the full council a positive recommendation that the PAB work with the department on the department policy proposals in our report. And 2, that you endorse our recommendations for city council action on several fronts. As our former mayor put it, this place is a clear example of the need for reform. So I'll stop there because I know we don't have much time.
Thanks, Board Member Calavita. Chair Caetano, everybody else before I turn over to the chief.
Hi, I have no more additional comments. Yes, please, Chief, go ahead.
Okay. Great, thanks, Chief Lewis.
And good morning, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me here. I did submit to the Public Safety Policy Committee a memorandum, more specifically responding with my thoughts around the PAB and ODPA's texting report, and happy to answer any questions around that. I do need to clarify, I'd like to clarify a couple things. One is that the independent investigation that reviewed the text message complaint did do more than simply authenticate text messages. There was publicly released information around that report that was able to be shared without violating personnel rights. And that investigation did in fact find that a couple things. The department did not have arrest quotas in place. They did not require arrest quotas. We don't have a practice of arrest quotas. We also do not have, that report also found that there was not an issue with following state laws around implementation of stay away orders or restraining orders and protective orders, and that our policies that are in place provide a foundation to ensure that we prohibit discrimination or harassment of all protected classes. That's baked into our departmental policies. That's also baked into our city administrative regulations. So I wanted to really set that foundation very clearly. I think it's also important to share or to state that both the Police Accountability Board and the offices of the Director of Police Accountability have very specific charter authorities and powers. And one of those authorities is to do policy reviews, is to look at departmental policies, to work with the department within that structure, and for us to talk about how policies are implemented, how they work, whether they need to be expanded or clarified. And so we have a system and a policy for that. And what normally happens is the PAB says, hey, we want to look at this at policy X. They let us know. I assign a departmental expert and the deputy chief to work at a subcommittee level with the PAB to talk about the policy, how it actually plays out in real time, and then recommendations are made. And so there is a system in place to do that kind of work. And so I was a little confused as to whether there was a different kind of process being suggested by some of the recommendations in this. And as a board member Calavita shared, and I can reiterate very strongly, we have a practice of working very closely with both the DPA and the PAB to really hear about policies and have that going, and that's not going to stop. And so we are engaged even for months-long processes on policies, and we'll continue to do so. Like I said, I provided some more specific comments in response to the recommendations in my written documentation. Happy to answer questions that you have there, but mostly just saying us walking away with really clear understanding about both what the PAB is looking for in here, and then also what the Public Safety Policy Committee wants the department to be focusing on right now is very helpful as we allocate our staff time and move forward.
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any questions on our end before we open to public comment?
No, I don't.
Well, a chance after.
We'll have some more chance as well.
I want to
So,
hear.
can I ask how many folks want to make a comment here so I can just get a count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then how many on
There's
Zoom?
currently 3. with their
Okay.
hands up.
All right, so we have 8, so we can go ahead and go up to 2 minutes, right? There's less than 10. Okay. Why don't we start with the folks in the room? If you'd like to make a comment, we'll just start here and kind of go around. 2 minutes. We'll put 2 minutes on the clock and then you're ready to go. Thank you. Go ahead.
Rifta Palatnik, District 6. I'm baffled by the fact that we've seen the evidence of texts that were racist and against the unhoused and that referred to arrest quotas. So whatever that investigation that the police department had, contradicts what we've all seen. So how can it be said that these policies are enforced or are working? And it's one thing to describe a nice policy, but apparently it's not working and something needs to be strengthened in order to avoid such happenings.
Thank you.
I can cede my time, the rest of it.
Okay, great. George, and then we'll go back.
Okay, just here, following the week. Yes, George Littman, former chair of the Police Review Commission. So I want to bring some my background in understanding the law that and policies that govern this. And starting with Board Member Calvi has covered a lot of this already. The city charter provides straightforwardly that all departments, officers, and employees of the city shall cooperate with and assist the director and the board and staff unless prohibited by state and federal law to produce all records and written or unwritten information and so forth. And so the request to carry out its duties and functions, that's the law. Then I want to talk, and it's not being carried out sufficiently. Then I want to go back to this meet and confer issue is a big smokescreen as far as I'm concerned. You have something in the Constitution of the city that overrides and makes unnecessary the requirement to or the provision for meet and confer. That needs to be studied. This body needs to really understand what the actual law is on that. Secondly, management decisions are not subject to meet and confer. There's a distinction in the Myers-Briggs Act that makes a distinction between issues affecting the working conditions of staff members and management decisions. So for both of those reasons, this should never have gone to meet and confer. Thirdly, the time for meet and confer was long in the past. It was actually conducted for a year and a half and held up the development of Measure II in 2020 for a year and a half. That was the time to raise this. Or if this is passed overwhelmingly by the city voters, by 85%, the union may sue. That's fine.
One extra minute, see it.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, those are some of the legal issues, and I think this board needs to really take it seriously. I feel that it's a whitewash, just to put a finer point on what Rivka was saying, to say the department does not have a policy in favor of arrest quotas. That may or may not be the case, but clearly, at least this team had a policy in favor of arrest quotas and of many other really inappropriate activities. We've never been able to learn how far, pardon me, but the rot went. Does it mean that it went to that sergeant and no one else in the department knew about it? No one was that bystander. And all these texts were going around. No one else had any view into these texts or participated in it. They weren't working with people in other departments. That challenges credibility. And that's a big failure. Honestly, that's a big failure for city management and thereby for the council. If the council does not take its control over this and say, yes, what we need to do is what the PAB is saying, affirm PAB's authority to access records, stop the endless meet and defer, and move on to getting what the city voted for. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
My name is Fitz Aguilar. There's 2 points that I'd like to make. One is in terms of arrest quotas. Since the Berkeley Police Department says it does not do arrest quotas, I don't see any reason why the Berkeley should not have an explicit policy saying there will not be arrest quotas. Since that is supposedly the practice, it ought to be the policy. So I would really recommend that you ask the department and the PAB to create a policy for the council to look at to ban arrest quotas in the city of Berkeley. And the other piece is the first recommendation about affirming the police accountability board's ability to access documents and records. This really held up the whole process unnecessarily for a long time. The police accountability board is supposed to have access to records, and the police department was not cooperative in providing those. I believe this is an issue for the council that you should be, helping the council come to affirm that the policy of the police department needs to be to turn over records as needed for the Police Accountability Board to perform the actions that they are required to perform. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you. So in any profession or any career where there's where it's high pressure, you have among law enforcement, attorneys, journalists, making sometimes comments to each other that seem distasteful or that are distasteful to relieve the tension of their jobs. However, the question becomes, what is the nexus to actually what happens in terms of that establishing an atmosphere so that they are not conducting their job properly and professionally and are otherwise committing misconduct. And so I support the Police Accountability Board getting the information they need to look beyond the policies on paper. As we all know, policies on paper are not always followed in practice. Our practice often exceeds what is stated in paper. And so they need to conduct their investigation so that they can see how this translated to actual conduct. And beyond the quotas and as well as the quotas. As to stay away orders, we all know this awful case from the US Supreme Court where a woman called repeatedly about her girls. She had a restraining order and her 3 small girls were with the husband and she feared for their lives. And in fact, the police did not respond and 3 dead little girls were found in the back of a pickup truck. So the US Supreme Court may have held that there is that discretion as to whether or not law enforcement should respond with stay away orders. However, I would hope that in Berkeley, we would hold to a higher standard in terms of the critical use of enforced stay away orders. And last, I just want to say that everybody knows this alliance exists among law enforcement where you back your fellow officers. And I would hope that our police department would be above that and encourage officers to report misconduct and that is the standard of the Berkeley Police Department, as opposed to always blindly backing your officer despite misconduct.
Thank you,
Your
Carol.
colleagues. Thank you.
Next, anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm Edward Opton. I'm a member of the Mental Health Commission. I'm here today in my capacity as an individual. This hasn't been discussed by the commission. I want to commend the reporter and her organization for putting together the excellent report that you have heard this morning. Among other things, it illustrates how difficult it is to pry the most relevant and important information from an area of city employment where its leadership and membership would prefer to keep things in the dark. The Accountability Board has gotten a lot of important information, but it wasn't easy to get, and it took a long time. In the area of our city's mental health efforts, we have similar problems, particularly where the delivery of services and prevent and protections to mentally ill persons intersects with areas with the activities of the police in ways that we have not been able to get straightened out or reported on. So we, the Mental Health Commission, will be working on that as best we can, but we have to resign ourselves to the fact that at least at present, we face the same obstruction to getting information that the Police Accountability Board can. So I fervently hope that this group and our city council will stand behind our city advisory boards
at the Mental Health Commission as they attempt to disentangle what has been going on and what should be going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we'll go to Zoom now. Okay.
Sure thing. We'll go to the Zoom speakers. Please raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like to speak. Our first speaker is Janice Schroeder. Janice, you should be able to speak.
Thank you very much. I'm a resident of Berkeley for the past 47 years, and I'm speaking today because I hope that the members of the committee, as well as the full council, will totally respect the PAB findings and, very importantly, implement the PAB policy modification recommendation. Racial disparities and arrests remain today. The PAB must have full access to requested records. I feel it is vital that there is full transparency and accountability and justice in the Berkeley Police Department and on the City Council. I thank every member of the PAB for their incredible work, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Ilana Auerbach.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the PAB and to the members of this committee. Chief Lewis referred to a report that made claims with no supporting evidence and claimed that that report couldn't be, let's just leave it at that, no supporting evidence. Over a year ago, Berkeley Cop Watch published a report with careful analysis of police data in collaboration with the Human Rights Data Analysis Group and information from numerous Public Records Act requests and the previous district attorneys, well, the previous before Pamela Price, district attorney's office under Nancy O'Malley. Some of our findings include that 1 in 2 people arrested, this was from the data from our police department, 1 in 2 people arrested by the BPD between 2018 and 2022 were Black. Arrests climbed drastically in the fall of 2019 and winter of 2020, and bike force officers made a disproportionate contribution to this trend. Finally, since 2020, every year, more than 15% of arrests made by the bike force were dropped by District Attorney O'Malley. In 2020, that figure exceeded 35%. I want to remind members of this committee who may not be aware because you weren't on the council at the time, Cheryl Owens was a member of the Police Accountability Board. She initially led this investigation. She resigned from the PAB the day after Chief Lewis, who was the interim chief at that time, was promoted to permanent chief in May 2023. Before any investigation was completed. Before tendering her resignation, Owen said, "There is no collaboration on any front in this city, nor do I believe there's a commitment to civilian oversight of the police." You now have an opportunity to follow the direction of the vast majority of Berkeley residents who want police oversight. Please approve the positive recommendation to the full council and endorse the PAB recommendation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Councilmember Harrison.
Well, that's ex-Councilmember Harrison, and I am not appearing at all council meetings to comment. I just feel a personal responsibility to be here today because while on council, I recreated the bike team after it'd been out of use for many years. I did so because of my years working in the California justice system have taught me that having police closer to the community can build trust and confidence in law enforcement, which is critical to fighting crime. Contrary to the intention in establishing the team, the text messages undermined community trust. There is literally nothing more important in government, as we can see today. As with any special assignment, close monitoring is necessary. An informal arrest quota was created within the team, as we can see from the messages, leading to the egregious behavior we see in the text messages. Had patterns of overtime been more closely monitored by police management, the far greater arrest by this team would have been revealed. This is not an isolated incident of one bad actor. I respect the high-level department policies against discrimination. However, interviewed officers interviewed by the PAB rejected any reading of the text as racist, disdainful, or as pushing quotas and dismissed them as jokes. Also, I want to point out the PAB is not just another commission. The PAB, empowered by the Charter Amendment, has substantial expertise and experience in dealing with issues of policing and oversight. The members are chosen by the council as a whole, and they sign an oath of confidentiality. The charter is clear about the role of the PAB. Passed after decades of organizing, the Charter Amendment gave the PAB not just the right, but the duty to provide oversight of BPD policy, practices, and procedures. This is just as important as investigating complaints of individual misconduct. I believe concerns about confidentiality raised by the department are a red herring. I urge this committee to pass an ordinance affirming the PAB's ability to access records to prevent the lengthy delays in providing information to the PAB, which have occurred in the past. In addition, I urge you to create a public repository of sustained allegations of racist posts as called for under California law. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Julie Dickey.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Julie Dickey, and I'm a 25-year resident of Berkeley. I remember the day that the expose of the text came out, and it was just horrifying. And then we also found out that that had been quite a while ago that those texts had been had happened, and only because someone who had retired from the police force produced them, and it was horrifying. And yes, the community needs to feel safe. They need to feel good about the force that is supposedly to protect them. And then I will just reiterate that the PAB was established by 85% of Berkeley voters. And it is critical that they have the power of oversight because that is given to them in the original charter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nathan Mizell.
Council members, my name is Nathan Mizell. I was a PAB member for several years, and I believe I was the first person outside of city government to know about these allegations. I fully support the work of the commission. They have put together a comprehensive report that details many of the issues that I faced during my time on the board and many that have came since. As previous speakers have said, former Commissioner Cheryl Owens resigned because of how bad the city was at actually allowing the investigation to go forward. I saw firsthand how the city was terrible at allowing the investigation to go forward. The department blocked the ability of the board to do its charter-bound role. There is simply no question of this. There are almost certainly more text messages than the 17 that are in your packet, but we will never know because the city did not do its job in actually preserving records. And by the time that the PAB was able to even get the department to respond after having to file subpoena requests, they said that they had no other records. I've done the math on that, folks. It's basically impossible. There are more messages, we'll just never see them. I cannot stress enough how important it is to hold up the independence of the board. If we really want police oversight in the city, right? If we just want rubber stamps, I know that's becoming more common, unfortunately, then we don't need to do it. We don't need to pass any of this. We can keep saying we care about police oversight, and that may be fine for some. That may be more politically expedient for some. But I believe if we truly care about how our community is treated, if we truly want police oversight that is effectual, we have to support the PAB in this moment. Please pass the recommendations that they have set forward. Please understand the depth of the issue. And I'll just quickly underscore, if this had happened and the messages hadn't been produced by Shadowdy, we would never even have known about this if we do not change our procedures now. This is our opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is George Perez-Velez.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, council members and the community. 20 years resident of the city of Berkeley, formerly 14-year commissioner of the Police Review Commission, currently also doing oversight at the state and federal level. both at BART and NACOL. I rise today to put my voice behind the recommendations from the PAB. In 2020, you created a system that created a system of check and balances, which is important oversight. Oversight has to have three tenets: accessibility, transparency, and accountability. These recommendations go a long way at pushing forward transparency and accessibility. Can have a system passed by 80% of the voters in 2020 after long years of advocacy for changing the oversight structure in the city of Berkeley. And when you have recommendations from you, which are based on solid policy and critical thinking, and then dismiss those recommendations. We have had a long history of resistance to change in the city of Berkeley, and it's up to the politicians to make those tough choices. Choices that sometimes seem tough, sometimes choices that are compounded with clamors of morale within the police department, or what can or cannot be done. City Council proved in 2020 and in other instances their commitment to oversight and having the valor and the vigor to make the right choices. So I encourage you to please accept the recommendations of the PAB today and continue to move public policy in the right direction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That was the last Zoom speaker.
Okay, great. So discussion on our end. Colleagues, any questions or?
I have a question for Chief Lewis.
Go for it, yeah.
Former Councilmember Harrison referred to the police department's objections regarding access to records as a red herring, or the objections related to confidentiality as a red herring. Could you speak more about that? I'm curious to hear your response to that, and what is the nature of those objections? If you could share that with us.
Yeah, so we are bound by government code, public records requests for the way we release records. There are some venues that the PAB operates in where the members of the public are part of those processes. So some of the charter review, or I'm sorry, the policy review work, subcommittee work happens outside the confines of confidentiality agreements. Then there's also records that go over as part of personnel complaints. And so those are more extensive records, include body-worn camera footage and things like that. Those processes are defined or being negotiated or worked through in a meet and confer process around permanent regulations around handling disciplinary matters. So it's a little of combining two different topics or purposes for what the records are sought for. The charter speaks very specifically about the different kinds of, in different places and the different extent in which records can be released. And so where there's dispute around that, some of those discussions are being had at the table with those groups that have stakeholder interest in the release of those records. So it's not a matter of management not wanting to release it. I have said from the beginning and will continue to say, the sooner we get to permanent regulations that set clear expectations around what records get released and in what manner and how they're protected, the confidentiality of those records, the sooner we can get down to the business of undertaking both the community review processes of our policy and the specific evaluations of complaint investigations by both the DPA and the PAB as they're prescribed to do pursuant to the charter.
And on that point, on the meet and confer, I know the discussion's been happening for a while. Do we have a sense of, I know there's been changes in representation on our side, on the BPA side. Any sense of, because again, if that's true, I just want to make sure we're getting to the point where we have the regulations in place. We're probably.
So yes, the chief and I and board member Lethwich are all part of that process. But I just want to underscore that those regulations are specifically about individual personnel complaints filed by members of the public. They are not what we're talking about here. We're talking about our duty as the PAB to investigate not only formal policies and potential violations, but to look at overall policy, practice, and procedure. The meet and confer process that's going on now with regard to our regulations is narrowly about individual complaints filed by members of the public. And it really has little to do with what we're talking about here today, because what we're talking about here today is recommendations for certain council actions. And this is the recommendations that we are putting out today are not about what's in the regulations. The regulations, for better or worse, are narrowly confined to individual complaints by members of the public. We didn't have that in this texting situation. And so that's a different sort of can of worms. And yes, it's true that we're in the midst of doing that, working through those regulations. And to answer your question, actually about timing, it is taking a very long time, and it will be another very long time until that process is complete. But I just wanted to underscore that those regulations aren't really relevant to what we're talking about here today. For better or for worse, I would have preferred to make them more comprehensive.
And Director, and I know there was a discussion about, access to records and compelling record production subpoena. I mean, do you feel like you have the tools to access records now? I mean, I'm trying to understand the gap.
Sure. And I think part of the struggle with this particular case was because the personnel element, what could and could not be released publicly. So there were some internal conversations, some interpretations of the charter. And in the early stages, we were not given the access to these records, or when we did receive them, they were significantly delayed. Some of these things have been resolved. I think we're in a better understanding about our subpoena authority and about what access to records we have. But I think that there's still the opportunity to leave no ambiguity, because we can't necessarily just depend on who's currently in the current agency at the time to interpret it, but rather have more systemic reforms to leave any doubt about what the charter says and doesn't say.
Sorry, I hopped in there. Sorry, I hopped in there.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes, so I just want to thank everyone for being here and giving their public comments and the presentation. I know these were, it was very troubling for our community to learn about these text messages. And I know that independent investigation has taken place. And Chief, can you just explain, when there is a sustained complaint, I'm just speaking in general, like when a sustained complaint is made by the PAB, who is responsible, according to the charter, for undertaking discipline of an officer?
Yeah, so the way that the charter authority is set out for our process is transitioned from the PRC to the PAB. And what occurs now is the Director of Police Accountability produces finding and recommendations based on reviewing a complaint process. He presents those to the PAB. They determine whether they want to support those recommendations or have a hearing and what the findings are. Those two bodies come together and either independently or separately can make findings. And then those findings are presented to me as part of my disciplinary process to consider along with all the materials. I then make a tentative finding, which I advise the Director of Police Accountability of. And by charter authority, he can either choose to accept my findings, and then they become final findings, or he can ask that the findings go to the city manager's office, and the city manager's office would review the work of the PAB, the work of the DPA, the work of BPD, and make a finding in that case.
Okay, thank you. So
I'm sorry, so I didn't quite answer your question. So
that did answer, but
okay.
If you have more, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say once findings are made, that the city manager's office may recommend findings as part of that, or may just simply sustain a finding and direct the office of the chief to make a decision about what the appropriate level of discipline is from within for the final decision, if that makes sense. You asked with the discipline, when we land on discipline, there's a sustained finding, meaning that you find that a thing happened. And then there's what is the appropriate discipline to be applied because that thing happened.
Okay, thank you for that. So, I see that there are 4 recommendations here related to this item. I just want to state, for me personally, I'm not prepared to pass an ordinance. I think that this issue of access to documents and records is complicated. I understand there's a meet and confer process, so I'm not prepared to get in the middle of that right now. On the second recommendation, adopt a robust resolution ensuring full and meaningful accountability for sworn officers. I understand we have policy 321 that provides for standards of conduct. Chief, can you elaborate on what specifically is not in policy 321 that could potentially be in a resolution, or do you think that policy 321 is comprehensive enough?
It's a very broad policy, and it talks about standards of conduct of personnel, both on duty and off duty. It requires officers to not only follow departmental policies and city policies, but also to act in accordance with state law, federal law, and to also be responsible for their conduct, not bringing discredit upon either their profession, the city, or the department. And so it's a robust policy that's meant to cover standards of conduct, how we professionally carry ourselves in responsibility to our oath of office and to our duties within law enforcement. Then there's other additional departmental policies that speak more specifically around topics having to do with discrimination and our fair and impartial policing directives and things like that.
Okay, thank you for that. And then, recommendation 3 is about this public repository for sustained allegations. I think we already have a Public Records Act process to access records. I'm not sure that we need to go beyond the state law, which I know is strengthened to make these police records more transparent. So I'm not ready to support that recommendation today. And then finally, on calling on state legislators to extend the prohibition on arrest quotas. I think we heard from our chief, we do not have arrest quotas. The independent investigation found that there were no arrest quotas. I don't support arrest quotas. So I mean, we could certainly look at sending a letter to our legislators if there's further state action that could be done on that. Those are my comments on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chief, and I know this might also bleed into the next conversation about the early intervention system, and do we have a sense that if we had a more robust EIS in place, like basically how could we have identified the problem that we saw in the DTF, I guess, sooner? I guess is the question. So I do take, I agree with you from the perspective of, as a department, we don't have a policy that supports arrest quotas. On the other hand, we do have, an example of behavior that was not acceptable, did not meet standards of the community. So I guess the question is how, moving forward, how do we do a better job of identifying that early? Do we think EIS is part of that? Are there other ways of identifying that sooner? Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we may talk about this a little bit when we talk about the next report, but the fair and impartial policing work and the recommendations that were generated via that task force, the mayor's task force work that engaged in that work, set us on a path to improving our early warning system that has been around for decades in our department, but was not as robust as it could have been. And so a first step into that work was to clearly identify stop data and the tenets of fair and impartial policing into our early warning system. I have to give a great deal of appreciation and credit for the collaboration that we have since then undertaken with the PAB, with the police union to expand our work in the early intervention system. And so which started as hey, let's have a consultant come in and advise us on our program very quickly by both union personnel, police department management, and members of the PAB, especially board member Cayetano is on the call. They said, hey, it's not a consultant we need. It's a platform, a system. And the system that we then got council approval to bring on is going to look at 90+ metrics of performance to try and identify when someone is working and is an anomaly within our data. When our data is telling us that someone needs early intervention. And the whole purpose of early intervention is to address things pre-discipline, before they become a disciplinary issue, and to provide training, adjust policies, you know, to be able to look at things in real time through that kind of dashboard analytics, to know what are the outcomes related to our work, and to do those interventions when they happen. And so, you know, things like the some of the things that were raised as part of the text report would absolutely be things that would be identified via that process, and could lead us to doing strengthening policies, strengthening training, or addressing individual issues. If an officer has individual issues that need to be addressed, whether that be a substance abuse, stress, home stress, or some other something resulting from a critical incident that happened at work, something like that. That'll all be things that would emerge through this EIS process. And again, so we can get ahead of things before, instead of them becoming policy violations.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember O'Keefe, anything else on your end?
Comments and questions?
Yeah.
Okay. I just have a comment. I appreciate Councilmember Chris Irwani's going through it, my recommendation. So I'll just speak generally that I think that I don't see any evidence that I'm aware of that the sort of misconduct like what happened a few years ago, which was unacceptable, is more systematic or ongoing. And I think if there was a pattern of this type of thing that it happened, this has happened a few times, or there have been more serious allegations, I might be more inclined to support these deeper reforms. But given that we do have an equivalent process to address most of these, I'm not inclined to support it this time.
One other thought from my perspective is because I think sounds like the sense is we can't, we're not prepared right now to move something to council. One other thought I had would be for us to develop, and I'll say, look, I have very strong confidence in the department and the leadership of the chief. I also have very strong confidence and belief that robust civilian oversight is critical to maintaining the quality of the department that we have and the department that we want. So we need both. And so I wonder if there is, it is not in front of us, but developing a resolution that sort of affirms that, our commitment is to the best possible quality police department. We have confidence in the department. We have confidence in the oversight body, and, just hitting a couple of these things in the form of a resolution that we bring forward to the council. I think there might be something there that we could do. That's, again, my sense. Again, not prepared to do that right now because we don't have it in front of us. It would take some work to draft something, but I'd also be happy to take a first cut and bring it back one of our next meetings if that is appropriate. But you guys, but that's you tell me what the sense of the body is.
I have a little bit of a distaste for resolutions that don't actually change anything, but I'm open to, drafting something that might actually feel different than what we have existing.
Yeah, I would be open to that, and a reiteration of our values I think is important given what occurred, and we can perhaps I don't know if we can weave in some element of recommendation number 4 here to send the resolution requesting some kind of strengthening of the prohibition on arrest quotas to the state. I think we have to look at that more to see if that could all be handled by one document, but I would be open to that, and I think per our protocol in these policy committees, we do have to take some kind of action on this, and so I would thank the Police Accountability Board for the report and the thought, and ultimately I would have to give this a negative recommendation with the knowledge that we would come back with a resolution of some kind that we could support.
Okay. And so we need to act on these specific recommendations that are brought to us. Is that right?
Yes,
opposed
I
to
think we have to, ideally, we need to take action on this item
Got it.
before the committee.
Okay.
And we only have, Rose, if you want to go over, like, we only have certain options: positive, qualified positive, negative.
And qualify negative.
Oh,
Exactly.
qualified
yes.
negative. We could do,
Yes.
okay, we could do
Yeah,
that.
there's four
Okay.
options. I'm happy to read through them if that.
Can you give me the just highlights real quick? Yeah.
Of course. Positive recommendation is the committee is recommending that council pass the item as proposed. Qualified positive is recommending that council pass the item with some changes. Qualified negative recommendation is recommending that council reject the item unless certain changes are made. Negative recommendation is recommending that the item not be approved at this time.
Okay. And in either of the middle two, the qualified suggestions, can we bring forward the resolution, or does that come from a different process?
Certainly. So once the committee takes action, this item will go back before the council for council to consider. If the committee or one of the members of the committee would like to bring forward an item or supplemental material, that could be submitted pursuant to the current legislative process. So the committee could submit a standalone item to the legislative process to be considered along with the PAB's item. Alternatively, the committee or a member of the committee could submit supplemental material for the council to consider as well.
So, and the supplemental material will follow supplemental deadlines.
Right.
Or it could be submitted alongside when this goes to the agenda committee.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be a moment for us to respond
Sure.
to the concerns? So this episode that we saw happen 2 years ago uniformly shocked the community. It shocked the council, it shocked the mayor, it shocked the community. Frankly, it shocked some members of the police department. And, you know, we are not saying that this is ongoing in the department right now. We don't know. This was brought to light by an officer who was terminated. So I hope that these things aren't going on, but it seems to me that we have an obligation to respond when a terminated officer reveals some things that went against the values of this community, that we have an obligation to respond and just say, well, that's the past, and we have written policies that make these things clearly below board. It seems to me that this body has an obligation to respond in a way that's preventive, you know, that responds in a way that, yes, it happened 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago now. It's been a long time coming. And we hope that these things aren't happening within the department now. I'm pretty sure we don't have something exactly similar to this. However, you know, cities pass policies in order to prevent things from happening and to do their utmost to make sure that these kinds of things don't recur. All right. And I think it's a mistake to say, well, that was then, this is now, we're fine, let's forget. You know, and so I strongly recommend that at least some of these things, especially, you know, the fact that we had in a significant part of the department, implicit, if not explicit, arrest quotas that we can see in the numbers that we showed you. We owe it to the community to say, we're opposed to this. And we have written a policy, and frankly, I think everyone was surprised that there wasn't already a policy against arrest quotas. Everybody I spoke to thought there was. It turns out it's only in the vehicle code. And so people were surprised that there's not an arrest quota. I bet people at the state level are surprised that there's not an arrest quota at the state level. I strongly recommend that we have an arrest quota in Berkeley and be a forerunner to sort of open people's eyes at the state level. And I would bet once people at the state level realize that there is no prohibition on arrest quotas, they will get one going. And Berkeley should be ahead of that curve. So that's with regard to that particular issue.
And we need to.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Rose.
Thank you. If I could just add to what I was explaining earlier, for the committee's consideration. My recommendation would be if the committee is going to recommend that council adopt a resolution, for example, something separate and alternative to the Police Accountability Board, I would recommend that that be submitted as a standalone item.
Okay.
So that it be agendized with this item here for the council's consideration.
Agendized alongside this item?
Correct.
Okay, should we continue this over until we have that resolution, or should we move this forward now?
It's at the committee's discretion.
Because my point, I guess my point is that, you know, I see whatever resolution, because I do think we can craft something. I think we could, that I think reflects the sense of this group. That it be the response to this item, I guess is what I'm just trying to find the right vehicle to do that. Because I agree, it's not going to necessarily line up specifically with all of these components. So if we need to continue it and then have that resolution presented the next time, or move this ahead.
I think that we should, if I may,
Go for it,
you know, I think we should take action on this item.
Okay.
And we don't have the resolution, but it can be submitted.
Okay.
It's sort of creating a shot clock, though, of when we have to complete that resolution.
Okay. So then would the motion be qualified negative subject to us developing the resolution?
I think qualified negative is
The council
It's not quite-
reject the item unless certain
So
changes are
qualified,
made
so
to the item.
so that I don't think we can do that because we're not intending to change this item. We're intending to do a separate
Okay, got it.
one. So I
Okay.
think we have to just say negative
Okay.
recommendation for this item.
Okay.
But I do want to again thank everyone who's here, and I do think we can say something about the arrest quotas. Potentially in the separate standalone item that we're thinking about.
Mr. Chair, just a quick process question, because it was unclear to me. The commissioner's manual has a provision for what's called a companion report from the city manager that usually goes along with any commission report. We did include our office report, given the significance of this event. We provided 8 recommendations to council, to the city manager, and to the community to consider. So it wasn't clear to me in this meeting if that's even being considered or if that's separate and apart, but I just wanted to highlight there. And if I can just add, I would say probably the most important recommendation that I think our office put in that companion report is adopted a resolution of a formal apology to the community. We are several years out. We know that these text messages were authenticated. They did cause a lot of harm to the community. We're in Black History Month. We have community members that have been historically marginalized in this community, in the country. We're facing a very significant political climate nationwide, and I think we need to recognize if we're going to heal from this. Behind me in the audience, we also have one of a nationwide police and expert speaker that'll be hosting an event tomorrow with us to talk about how do we envision a different community here in Berkeley, police accountability. So I do want to just uplift that we need to heal from this moment.
Right. Thank you. Go ahead.
I want to just add something to what I said earlier regarding the resolution. You know, I'm new here. I hadn't realized that I guess the council has not spoken out formally about this incident. And so I agree completely with what all of you are saying, that that's very necessary. And we absolutely do need to make a statement of apology and of healing. So I hope that's in our resolution and I fully support it.
Okay, so I think so the intent is we are going to craft something that brings a lot of these threads together, will not be specifically in this particular form. And so,
Okay.
and then so we need to act on this.
So I motion to make a negative recommendation on this item.
Second.
Roll.
Okay, Councilmember Casablanca.
Yes.
O'Keefe.
Yes.
Blackerby.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Let's move on to item 4, fair and impartial policing implementation. Is that Chair Cayetano? Are you going to present on this?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hi, council members. I unfortunately didn't want to interject into your process, so I had my hand raised to hopefully speak before you voted on the last item. But I will say that we appreciate, the resolution and the acknowledgement of what took place on the task force. But by not taking action on the recommendation to empower the PAB to investigate, to access records, we're now going to live in a world where it's entirely possible that the only thing that the public can rely on to reveal this type of misconduct, if it is happening in the department, is from whistleblowers from within the department itself. And the entire purpose of the PAB and its creation was to prevent that from happening, to be able to actively oversee the department and to understand the practices and procedures that are taking place.
And so, sure, by the way, my intent is in the resolution. I think we'd also, we'll put it, I'm going to put that in the draft, the ability to access records. So again, I do feel like that's an important piece of the oversight function, critical part of the oversight function. So
perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. If I missed that, my apologies.
I wasn't clear on that. Yeah, I was not clear on that. But that's my intention, is put that in the resolution.
Great. That is great to hear. Thank you so much, Council Member Blackerby. Speaking to the fair and impartial policing report, I failed to introduce myself. My name is Josh Cayetano. I'm the new chair of Berkeley's Police Accountability Board, and I would like to introduce my colleague, Vice Chair Leah Wilson, who will present the fair and impartial policing report in a second. But I first wanted to take a moment to explain why the previous council had unanimously voted to approve these recommendations in February 2021. As Vice Chair Wilson will explain, a major impetus was the 2018 Center for Policing Equity report, which revealed stark racial disparities in BPD's vehicle stop and use of force data. But in late 2020 and early 2021, there was also a national bolt of clarity and outrage brought on by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis that caused all cities, not just Berkeley, to have a sustained period of introspection and to view this old data with fresh eyes. And it is within this period of clarity and introspection that the Berkeley City Council unanimously passed the recommendations and empowered the PAB to monitor and assess their implementation. And I'm really grateful to my colleague, board member Kitty Calavita, for her tireless work on the Downtown Task Force report. And her presentation reminded me that in February 2021, when the council was considering these items, it was none other than Sergeant Koselleck, who was the president of the BPA at the time, who appeared before the council and asked them to vote no. And he said that the recommendations, quote, will turn officers into filing clerks, gutting their much needed time on the streets within our community. And that is what we just heard. The item we just heard is relevant to that. And I thank BPD for implementing the council's directives, despite Sergeant Koselleck's refrain to the extent that it has. But the PAB disagrees that implementation is as complete as the department says it is. And to the extent that the committee hears the same objections today that it heard in February 2021, I ask the committee to reject them again today. And with that, I turn it over to Vice Chair Wilson, who is the primary author of this report.
Couldn't hear you. Let's see. Can't hear you, Vice Chair.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right, great. Thanks. Let's keep going. I know we have time issues. You can go to the first slide. So I'm going to cover a few things that you see here, hopefully leaving plenty of time for discussion. Go forward. So as the chair just mentioned, the council passed the FIP policy recommendations in February 2021. And the impetus for the FIP was that 2018 Center for Policing Equity report. And you can see here what that CPE report found in terms of disparities in terms of stops, searches, and arrests, focusing primarily on the black-white difference because that is where you see the most significant disparities, but of course they exist with respect to Latinos as well. Go forward. The Police Accountability Board, as the chair mentioned, was tasked with monitoring and assessing BPD, that should say BPD implementation of the directives. The PAB has satisfied this requirement through a review of the quarterly reports that the department submits. For the purposes of what we're going to discuss today, the reports covered address the period June 2021 to October 2023. Go forward. In terms of where we are, as the chair mentioned, certainly the department feels, I believe, that it has implemented the vast majority of the recommendations. We provided in an appendix to the report a chart outlining the implementation status, at least as asserted by the department. One of the things I want to highlight for this body is that it's really difficult to assess the actual status because the implementation reports or the status reports focus on process rather than outcomes. So we really don't know if we've made any improvements in the underlying data. That was the impetus for this initiative from any of the quarterly reports that have been submitted. Our report, in contrast, attempts to focus on data to determine whether or not any progress has been made. Go forward. So in terms of the first issue, stops, we know now, based on a data analysis conducted by the PAB with the support of the department, that there has been a modest improvement in racial disparities in motorist stops. Again, looking at that black-white difference, you can see Black motorists were 6.5 times more likely to be stopped than their white counterparts. Now that's down to 5.8. Conversely, the racial disparities in pedestrian stops have significantly regressed since the Center for Policing Equity report. Go forward. Looking at arrests and searches, Black people are now 10.4 times more likely to be arrested than their white counterparts. This is a significant regression from the CPE analysis, which showed 2 times more likely. On the other hand, we've made improvement in the area of searches, where Black people are 10.5 times more likely to be searched. In the CPE analysis, it was 20 times more likely to be searched. So you can see that just looking at the data, it's really a mixed bag as to whether or not any progress has been made. Go forward. Now we're going to talk about a few of the actual recommendations. You can advance the slide. The first significant recommendations was in the area of low-level infractions. The directive by council was to implement a new traffic enforcement model, such as to reduce the incidence of stops for low-level infractions. The department uses a 3-prong approach to effectuate this directive: primary collision factors, community reports, and community caretaking. And again, looking at impact, we can see that for the period assessed, traffic stops overall have increased. However, the percent of stops for equipment and low-level infractions declined. So that's a positive. Go forward. The PAB does have some recommendations for modification of the 3-prong approach. Most importantly, and what I would tee up here, is the council never defined low-level infractions. So we have this directive to reduce low-level infractions, but there is no set definition for what those infractions are. We're also recommending that future updates on this particular recommendation do include data to support the kind of analysis that we presented today, to see if in fact you're seeing reductions in low-level infractions once those are defined. You can go forward. Another recommendation that I wanted to highlight is that that there be a definition for stops of criminal suspects. So the council specifically directed BPD to use a clear evidence-based definition for stops. The department indicates that this recommendation has been implemented, but I think it's important to clarify that no definition has actually been established. So it's unclear to us how, in fact, this recommendation has been implemented. Go forward. Another council directive was to limit the use of race and ethnicity as determining factors. In fact, to say that they can only be used in conjunction with other criteria for stops. BPD indicates that this recommendation has been implemented. The basis for that indication by the department is that existing laws already prohibit the use of race as a defining factor. It's not clear from any of the reporting what the department has actually done to implement this recommendation, besides saying that existing law already prohibits the behavior. Go forward. The early intervention system, I'm going to turn to the chair to briefly talk about this one.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wilson. The chief is right to say that that implementation is currently underway for an early intervention system. I will note that when I came onto the board in November or October 2023, every single status report from the department from March 2022 onward had said that this item was complete. And it is only because of our diligence that we were able to understand that, in fact, the BPD's EIS was not capturing outlier data as the council had intended it to. And the chief is right that the current system that both the PAB, BPD, and BPA have agreed on will capture the sorts of instances that occurred in the downtown task force unit and should intervene before these become instances of misconduct. And so that is scheduled for implementation in July 2025 this year, and a full as a test pilot, and the full implementation will be complete by December 2025. I will just flag for the council members that part of this process requires BPD, and the PAB, and the association to agree on a policy governing EIS. And what the council's directive was to establish an effective intervention system. And so that will be something that we will continue to discuss with the department and with our counterparts.
Okay, let's advance the slide. Profiling by proxy, I'm going to turn this over to the chair in a moment, but I would just highlight that to date, what the department reports when it says this directive has been satisfied is that the communications manual has been modified. In our view, that's likely insufficient to address this directive. Go ahead, Chair.
Yeah, I think embedded in our recommendation is not just what the chief pointed out, which is that we identify the caller, the race of the caller, but it is also about the officer response when they are dispatched. And we've seen instances where members of the community will call, and it is clear that the members of the community had some bias when officers respond to that call. They may, in that situation, side with the community member who observed a potential violation. And we recommend that the department train not just the dispatchers, but also the officers to identify when profiling by proxy through the members of the community could occur.
And I didn't go through it just in the interest of time, but one of our recommendations in the three-pronged traffic approach area ties to profiling by proxy. It's one of the prongs. I think it's the community caretaker prong, which as written today currently lends itself to a lot of ability for profiling by proxy. And so I just wanted to point out a nexus there between a couple of our recommendations. Go forward. Fire racist officers. Council directed that racist officers identified through social media and other screens be fired. This relates, of course, to the downtown task force recommendations that you just heard. The department again indicates that the way this directive has been implemented is through adoption of a policy. The policy does not contemplate social media scans. To our knowledge, social media scans are not happening. Further, there is a generic reference to accountability in the policy, but there is no definition of what that accountability is or indication that it would, in some instances, be termination. We most certainly recommend that social media scans be initiated. Go forward. Recommendations, these go ahead. This is recommendations to council. So the way that our report is structured, there are recommendations to the department, recommendations for ourselves, because I do want to highlight there were some things that we were supposed to be doing that we hadn't done, the PAB, and then recommendations for council. And what I want to elevate here is how critical it is that you all establish metrics to define whether or not these initiatives are successful. Right now, the effort is very much centered around development of policy, which is fine, but that is a process measure. There really is no accountability for the department or anybody else when you don't define what success looks like. Similarly, we're recommending that you direct the department to report on specific data elements to help in that assessment of whether or not progress has actually been made. And then, of course, a consistent theme with what you've heard this morning, that we do need to hold racist officers accountable, and accountable does need to include up and through termination. So with that, I think we can take the slide deck down. I am going to have to hop off. I think you can take it down. I'm sorry, but I have to go to another meeting. I didn't know this would be so long this morning. So I'm going to leave it to my capable chair to handle any questions. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Vice Chair. Is Chief Lewis still on? Chief, did you want to also chime in on some of these recommendations and your response?
Yeah, thank you very much. Happy to make a couple of brief comments. I know we're running a short on time a little bit, and I did submit also on this item a companion memo to the Public Safety Policy Committee covering the things that were directly recommended to the police department. I can share that I began my role as an interim chief very shortly after this recommendations landed. I am extremely proud of the work that the department has undertaken in support of the task force work around fair and impartial policing. It was an opportunity for us to really understand a lot of the impacts and the way we needed to state our work and be clear about our work so that our community could know that we were engaged in our efforts in a way that was transparent and accountable and fair. And so as we reported quarterly to council on the FIP items, the council that heard the FIP recommendations and directed them, we reported quarterly. We worked through recommendations. I will share that early on, we did say some things were completed. And we had a follow-up meeting. I know board member Calvita was on that follow-up meeting along with council members, and we talked about how the word completed might land to the community. And so I do want to be very clear that the fact that we complete work to set a policy that bans discrimination or sets a standard about how we make our stops and things like that doesn't mean that our focus on fair and impartial policing, our training around fair and impartial policing, our efforts end. Completed means that the council gave us a very specific body of recommendations, which we then implemented according to schedule and reported on, and council received those reports, asked us some follow-up questions, and or approved the completion as we worked through that. Our work will never end around policing in a fair and impartial way. Our collaboration will never end with the Police Accountability Board, with our community, with the Director of Police Accountability. Those are integral parts of the work that we do and the collaboration that we undertake with our community. I also know that I have a responsibility as a leader of this police organization to ensure that we keep our community safe. And that includes recognizing that our city is one of the most dangerous cities for pedestrians and bicyclists, has been for some time. And so we have an obligation to ensure that the work that the police department is engaged in around traffic enforcement is focused on those dangerous conditions. And so the direction that I have given the department very clearly in policy and protocol is to focus on what every year our data tells us is the most dangerous occurrences, and for officers to engage in and prioritize that as their traffic enforcement work. And that also means that a community member can call and report that they see a hazardous driver, someone who is in an intersection and not leaving the intersection, someone who is driving erratically on their cell phone. Like, that's an important part of it. And it's also an important part that if we get information about vehicles being dangerous or connected to a crime, or that we have a flock alert about a certain vehicle, that we have the ability to stop and detain that vehicle and investigate what's happening there. Evidence-based responses and how we respond to do that is focused on the law. Reasonable suspicion, observing a traffic violation, those things are focus points in not only state law, but in our policies. And when we point to a specific policy or a specific law as saying that has been the foundation of why we think a recommendation is done, it means exactly that if someone engages in that behavior that is counter to what the recommendation is banning, we have a policy in place that means we will directly deal with that individual. And then we also have our EIS system in place that will identify if people are anomalies that might lead to a policy violation. So there's a lot in this report. I did want to give our Office of Strategic Planning and Accountability Manager, Arlo Momberg, an opportunity to talk a little bit. The CPE report was a start point. It was a data collection and observation and reporting in 2018. We've come a long way since then. And I think he can share a little bit about where we are now and what the data is telling us now.
Thanks, Chief, and good morning. Yeah, the 2018 CPE report was a touchstone in this fair and impartial policing task force process. Since then, a lot has changed. The overall volume of stops, most significantly, has just about been cut in half since that time. The proportion of those stops that are equipment violations has gone down. The demographic composition of the stops have changed. So we are in a different paradigm in terms of the stops that we're making today versus where we were 7 years ago. Also, throughout that process, we heard from experts that told us that there are a number of potential drivers of the disparities or the differences between the census demographics and our stop demographics. One of those potentially could be implicit bias in the decision-making of officers, but others could be more directly tied to deeper root causes tied to systemic racism and disparate exposure to criminogenic factors. So as a part of our process now, we use industry and academic standard tests to make sure that the potential drivers of those disparities that are within our control, so namely that implicit bias in officer decision-making, are not contributing to the difference in census demographics and our stop demographics. So I'm happy to go into the nitty-gritty of what those tests look like. But I just at this high level want to highlight that we're focused on measuring the things that we're doing as a police department that might contribute to that difference in demographics. But we heard from multiple experts that there are potentially factors outside the department's control that contribute to those factors. And in fact, the recommendations, the original recommendations from that FIP report were focused on officer decision-making. So I think that's where our efforts have been, and we've seen great progress in that respect.
Thanks, Arlo. Thanks, Chief.
Can I just add one more thing? I'm sorry, real quick. I do want to also share what we're really proud of is the difference between the data that was available for the analysis in 2018 and today is that now with our Transparency Hub, we have real-time updates of data that the raw data sets are available, analysis is available on that. We provide a lot more detail about the stop data and the demographics around that in live time on our Transparency Hub. And in our annual report, when we report, we do a lot of the deeper dive analysis into the way we do our work, what our results are, what the annual report has told us around the data.
Great, thank you. Let's move to one minute public comment. Folks in the room, yeah, go ahead.
My name is Russell Bates. I've lived in Berkeley since 1973. Been a part of Berkeley Cop Watch for 27 years and done legal observing with the National Lawyers Guild for the last 10 years. I'm here representing myself. I'm not speaking officially for any of the groups. firemen. I'll get the ego part out of the way. I turned 78 Saturday. Yay, happy birthday. Cognitive dissonance is something that I mentioned at PRC and PAB meetings before. Because I noticed there's two kinds of white people, ignorant and stupid. Ignorant white people don't recognize that people of color are seen differently by police, by white people, by anybody trained by white people. And it's called racism. It does exist. It's existed since the beginning of this country. Prior to the beginning of this country, it's a real thing.
Wrap up. Yeah, a couple more. Finish your thought and we got to move to the next person.
Okay. Ignorant people don't know what's going on. Stupid people know what is going on and still continue to do it.
Right.
So we need to follow the recommendations of the Police Accountability Board. Stop kissing the chief's ass. The city manager in the past, every time when the Police Review Commission was very active.
Wrap up and yeah.
Okay, I will. One sentence.
Yeah,
I'll
let you finish. We gotta go.
Okay. The commissions would make recommendations, they'd be sustained, the city manager would overturn them every single time. So be aware of that too.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yes, Carol.
1
minute.
1 minute?
Yep.
The CIT international standard is that there be a CIT certified officer on every shift, and that CIT officer command the scene. Since Sergeant Jeff Shannon left several years ago, we haven't even had a CIT coordinator in Berkeley, nor have we had anybody other than me as a member of the community attend the CIT international conferences. It is this time in Anaheim, in California, and hopefully there will be attendance. I'm going to move on to state that in 2021, when I was going through CIT coordinator training, post-conference, the Alameda County CIT coordinator came up to me and said, "What's wrong with Berkeley?" He said Berkeley had not even been going to the county trainings, less the city. And had I had more time, I would be talking about some of the things that these conferences offer.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Anybody else in the room? George, and then we'll go back. 1 minute.
I don't, this is not really a forum that's really is that structured to have a real conversation. There's a lot to be said. That I wish that this committee would engage more directly with the PAB, meet with them, really try to understand what the issues are. And I think there are some, we follow, well, no longer in it, but the folks follow the data very closely. You still have the general thrust of the problem of the 6 or 7 to 1 disparity between how Black people and white people are treated when they're stopped. And one thing that wipes out this whole thing about criminogenics and makes that irrelevant and societal racism, for that matter, is the yield factor. So briefly, people should understand this. It's what happens when a person is stopped. It's not about who gets stopped. It's what happens. And the number of Black folks who get stopped and then get no enforcement is way higher than is the case for white. And that's just a tickle of a reminder to the council that you really should be paying this more attention, because in the Black community, everyone I talk to, literally, with almost no exception, is we're not treated fairly. So you can pass over it. You can take the status quo approach and take management's, or you can really look more deeply into what your constituents are feeling.
Okay.
Kit Saganor. So your Police Accountability Board is a group of very highly qualified and dedicated and thoughtful people and made a lot of good recommendations. clearly what you have in front of you today is not something that's all ready to just send it on to the council. This committee, which unfortunately meets maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a year, there's a lot of work that you could be doing in terms of improving public safety. As the chair suggested, you might wish to come back with some of these and work on these in depth. The issues of systemic racism, I'm happy that the police department is now looking at how, in some cases, the disparity in stops may be that they are downriver from other forms of systemic racism, in terms of, say, the kinds of cars that don't have the safety equipment and so forth. More could be done with that than just saying, well, that came from somewhere else, it's not our fault. This committee could work on looking at how systemic racism impacts safety in the city, and looking at more real in-depth solutions. And if the committee will, as a whole, perhaps one of the council members on the committee might want to work on those kinds of recommendations to bring to council. Thank you.
Yeah, right here, then we'll go back.
I didn't say my name last time. We've got Polatnik. I think what a lot of this brings out is you need to put more focus on outcomes. We hear a lot about, well, we have this policy or we have these rules, but the proof is in the pudding and the outcomes. So this is just a general comment to pay more attention to the outcomes and work with the PAB to ensure that it's outcomes we look at, not just paper policies. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Edward Ocklin. I spoke earlier this morning. Obviously, there is a lot more for all of us to say. There isn't time for us to say it here. So I hope that I will be able to send you a written communication soon. And I stand up so that if I am able to do that, you'll remember who sent it.
Got it. Eye contact. Got it. Back to Zoom. Anybody on Zoom?
All right, yes, Nathan Mizell, you should be able to speak.
Hi, thank you. I keep it brief. I got a minute anyways. Yes, please support the PAB. Please support their work on this. I hope you'll take it seriously. Given the format of these meetings, the rarity of these meetings, and all the other work as council members you have to do, I don't know if you can really do that. That's why we have the PAB, and I hope you will take the recommendation seriously. In regards to the item earlier, if you want to bring a nice item saying we're so sorry to the Berkeley community, this shouldn't have happened. Council said this shouldn't have happened 1.5 years, 2 years ago. What you should have done is actually consider the recommendation of the PAB seriously. But unfortunately, this committee decided to throw those out and write up some nice puff piece about, oh, we're so sorry this happened. No, we need substantive changes. The idea that such a resolution will be helpful is ridiculous. We need substantive changes. Please take the recommendation seriously. If you can't move forward now, that's fine. But the idea that saying we're sorry is enough when sorry did not prevent what happened is ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Julie Dickey.
Go ahead, Julie.
Sorry, I'm glad to hear from the police chief that she feels good about her department. And I'm just going to really encourage her to take advantage of this wonderful, thorough, and thoughtful police accountability board. And the more the two departments, our board and department, can work together, the more success I would foresee. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our last Zoom speaker.
Great. Thank you. Colleagues.
Okay, well, I can start us off. You know, I just want to thank everyone again for the comments. I want to thank the chief and the police department for implementing the 14 recommendations. I know implementing, as you noted, is an ongoing work in progress. I also want to appreciate what the chief said and just reiterate my concern for the number of pedestrians and bicyclists who are seriously injured or killed on our streets. And so we know that traffic enforcement is a piece of of that work. And so, just given the time here, I'm not prepared to vote on this today, just because I was expecting this meeting to end at noon, and so I don't know that we can take an action on this today. So I would recommend that we continue this so that we can determine whether what's appropriate to move forward from what the PAB is proposing. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's reasonable. We don't have, when's our next meeting though? Like a long time from now, right?
Mid-March.
Okay, that's not bad. Yeah, that sounds
That's not
reasonable.
bad.
Then.
Okay.
It would give some thoughts indefinitely,
I had a question for the PAB and the chief on the series of recommendations to the BPD. How much of that can you work through kind of in the oversight process and with the policy committees and that kind of stuff? Again, what I'm trying to figure out is what action you're asking us to take on those, or if those are things that you're working on with the BPD directly. Maybe that's for the chair first, and then chief.
Thank you for that. There, as the vice chair mentioned, there are a couple of benchmarks that we would appreciate council input on. For example, what level of reduction the council expects for their item to be complete when the reduction level for traffic has been reduced from 24 to 19%. Is that enough in the council's mind? Is it not enough? We don't know. We can debate numbers all day between the chief and I, and so having your input in that would be helpful. But there are a number of recommendations that we made that we can work out between us. I just want to emphasize that this is the first time in 3 years that we are giving people an update on the recommendations besides the quarterly updates that the chief has made. And so what we are doing is providing a status update for the council members, for the council on their fair and impartial directive from 2021. It's been 4 years actually. And so that was the bulk of our recommendation, and we would like input on the items that we outlined in our recommendation as well.
Because I think the recommendations you made to the council around establishing metrics, around additional data on traffic stops by race. I mean, I'm supportive of those asks. I'm also comfortable, as Councilmember Keswani suggested, if we want to come back and go deeper into those in the next meeting. But I'll say, like, I think the thrust of what's being asked for in terms of the council recommendations, I think I'm generally supportive of. And my main question is then basically you have then kind of 9 other items for the department, and then 2 or 3 other items for the PAB itself. And just if, it sounds like those you're kind of working through. But anyway, I'm just looking for what kind of input you want from us on those other pieces, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I'm happy for the committee to defer to the next meeting, and the chief and I can sharpen the issues to tee up a specific action item at the next meeting if that's what you prefer, especially given the hour.
Okay.
Chief, any other comments? Otherwise, I think we're kind of at a consensus here.
No, that sounds great. Look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay, so do you want to make a motion on that?
Oh, do we need to make a motion to continue it, or it just automatically will? Okay.
So we'll continue then this piece, and then also items 2, 5, and 6 to the next meeting without objection.
Yeah, and then they're not gonna
expire. Yeah,
okay.
Between now and the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments for you?
I just wanted to make one quick comment on the last item. Just to get on record, I am very, very supportive of any sort of action item that results in a greater clarification. It's a lot of the recommendations had to do with that, and I think that's very, very important. And I do plan to support those recommendations, but some of them are a little more complicated.
Okay. Let's move on to items for future agendas. Do we have any other specific requests from members of our group for things we want to add to the next agenda?
Yeah, later, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I might have something.
Great. Motion I move we adjourn.
Okay. Keswani?
Yes.
O'Keefe? Yes. Blackaby?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, council members.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
I asked Chair, is there an actual domestic violence report that's been released? Because that's on your agenda. I know there was a staffer that was hired under the reimagining monies for 2 years. And there